The Kunar Mountains carried winter, like a suit of armor. Ice and snow stacked 3 feet deep, and wind slicing through Kevlar, as if it were paper. And Lieutenant Lyra Vance moved at the rear of SEAL Platoon Bravo, her boots chewing out a steady rhythm in frozen ground. No one else seemed to notice, visibility shrinking to barely 15 feet, until the world blurred into a white veil of static. "Can't see a damn thing, petty officer." Cole Barrett muttered into his collar as frost gathered on his beard. "How are we supposed to pull anyone out in this?" And Lieutenant Commander Mason Creed lifted a gloved fist, halting the column as 12 men pressed against the mountainside, clearing corners that didn't exist in the storm, while somewhere ahead, a CIA advisor and his interpreter had gone dark 48 hours earlier, leaving Bravo with the lovely task of finding them. And Creed cast a look back at Lyra, his expression carrying that familiar strain of doubt she'd seen since Bagram. The same hesitation tightening the skin around his eyes before he finally nodded, the rest of the platoon not bothering to disguise their thoughts. "Still, don't get why command sent her, Petty Officer Second Class," Nate Rourke murmured, not quietly enough. "How's she supposed to call contacts? Charades?" Which earned a quiet snicker, while Lyra's jaw set, though her expression didn't shift. 2 years of that kind of garbage leaving her immune, ever since. Naren Province stole her voice and carved rope-like scars across her throat. And when the wind shifted, she turned sharply, raising 3 fingers, then a fist, the silent signal for enemy contact at 3 o'clock. While Barrett whispered, he saw nothing through the swirling white. But Lyra's MK-13 was already up, because she'd caught a shadow, just a smear of dark moving with intent 340 meters upslope. Her breathing leveled, heart dropping into a calm rhythm as the rifle became part of her. The shot cracking through the storm, and sending a figure tumbling 20 feet in a spray of red snow. Creed's radio hissing as Overwatch demanded clarification, and after a brief exchange he confirmed 1 hostile down at elevation, though Lyra gestured that more shapes had been there. 3, not 1. But the moment slipped as Creed reacted too slow, issuing a curt, "Roger, stay sharp, weather's tightening, extraction windows 4 hours." And Lyra checked her ammo. 20 rounds on deck, 40 in reserve, more than she'd ever need, before the team pushed on, swallowed again by the blizzard. Naren Province, spring 2021. Lived in her bones, in the phantom clench where her voice used to be, back when she'd been a JTAC, the voice threading ground forces to air support with precision that meant life or death, and in the ruined village of Daramesh. 7 Rangers had been pinned inside a compound, with fighters closing from 3 sides, while Lyra and her spotter held overwatch. Her voice that day, a cable of steel, yanking her team through hell. Phantom 2-1, danger close. My position marked by IR strobe. Enemy massing 75 meters north-northwest. Request immediate gun run. And the A-10 had screamed overhead, like a metal thunder god. But the enemy had been clever, sliding a technical with a heavy gun into her blind spot. And when she rose to mark the final strike, they unleashed fire that detonated beside her, shrapnel carving through her throat, collapsing her larynx, severing her vocal cords, drowning her in her own blood as she tried to scream coordinates into a radio that had already died, until Sergeant Logan Price dragged her 300 meters under incoming rounds. She survived. The Rangers survived. But her voice didn't. And after 6 months of surgeries and a year of therapy, the doctors confirmed the damage was absolute, irreversible. The Navy psychologist suggesting analysis or admin roles, in a tone dripping doubt. And Lyra walked out before he finished, qualifying as a sniper 3 weeks later, topping her class with perfect scores, while instructors muttered skepticism she'd heard 100 times. And none of it mattered once the rifle was in her hands. How could anyone coordinate a fight without a voice? She'd proved it with hand signals, scribbled notes, and when those fell apart, the harsh clarity of accurate fire. But Bravo Platoon didn't know her history. They only saw a weakness. Someone who couldn't shout, "Contact left," couldn't call medevac, couldn't argue a plan under fire, and in their world, silence meant death, not survival. Barrett had set it straight during their first briefing. "No offense, ma'am, but how do you lead if you can't talk?" Lyra had simply pointed to her rifle, then to her eyes, then dragged a line through the dirt between them. "Watch where I fire, and you'll get it." No one laughed, but no one trusted her either. The ambush struck at 1340, in a ravine so tight, the walls felt like they were closing in. Creed had taken a shortcut, hoping to outrun the weather, and the gamble blew up in their faces when the first IED detonated under the third man, sending Petty Officer Evan Brooks airborne with both legs torn apart below the knee, and before anyone regrouped, machine gun fire swept the column from both sides, ricochets screaming off stone as men collapsed into cover that didn't exist. "Ambush left and right!" Creed bellowed, wedging himself into a shallow dip barely wide enough for his shoulders. "Suppressing fire!" But there were no targets. The shooters were hidden in carved pockets along the cliffs, Bravo firing at phantoms while Brooks bled out on open snow. Lyra had dropped flat a fraction of a second before the blast, instinct faster than thought, and now lay still in a shallow wash as snow melted under her body heat, her scope cutting through chaos while her mind mapped angles, muzzle flashes, and enemy rhythm. Nothing was random. The shooters were funneling Bravo straight toward a dead end, where a fourth, silent position waited to finish them. Creed's radio spat static. No satellite uplink, no air, no QRF. They were alone. "We need to move!" Rourke shouted. "We're dead out here!" "Move where?" Barrett yelled back between blind bursts. "Forward's death, back's death. Pick one." Then, Creed caught a round through the shoulder and crashed down, blood painting snow, as Chief. Adam Cole crawled toward him under a storm of fire. They were trapped, losing ground fast. Lyra slowed her breathing until it vanished, the world narrowing to a clean internal quiet as she dissected the battlefield like a blueprint. Positions, timing, exposure, blind spots. Until she found it. A narrow side crack 30 meters right, hidden beneath an overhang. The enemy hadn't bothered to cover because it looked impossible, though desperation could make it otherwise. She had to tell them, but her voice was dust and memory, so she let her weapon deliver the message. The first round struck the snow 2 feet in front of Barrett's face, snapping his head back. The second hit 3 feet to his right. The third carved a clean directional line through the snow, all three forming an unmistakable arrow toward the slot canyon. "What the hell?" Barrett whispered, staring at the perfect vector she'd drawn with bullets. Then, he glanced back at Lyra, already shifting position, firing again. This time her shots carving a left-right pattern across the snow, mapping out safe footing through the buried minefield they'd unknowingly stepped into. Every round placed with surgical precision, despite the blizzard, despite the chaos, despite rounds shredding the air around her. "She's marking a route!" Donovan shouted, finally catching it. "Barrett, move! Follow her shots!" "That's insane!" he started. But another round punched into the snow, then another. Each impact a word in a sentence only those desperate enough could understand. Lyra was writing instructions in lead and frozen earth, crafting a language that needed no voice. Every muzzle flash became a beacon, every impact a coordinate, and she conducted a battlefield symphony with nothing but breath control and a trigger. Barrett moved. He had no real choice. And following the trail of bullet impacts, he reached the first safe patch she'd identified. No IED, no ambush, just solid ground. "Clear! Get Brooks!" Creed gasped through clenched teeth, blood soaking his sleeve. "Follow her marks." Two SEALs low-crawled toward the wounded man as Lyra covered them, her rifle snapping out commands. "Don't drift left. Hold position. Wait for this burst. Move now. Faster. Down. Roll right." Her scope never leaving the fight, turning her into a puppeteer working strings made of ballistics. A fighter broke from cover, sprinting to flank Barrett. Lyra's round punched through his upper chest before he'd taken 3 steps, and without hesitation, her next shot slashed a line in the snow. "Turn around. Someone behind you." And Rourke spun, spotted the second attacker, and dropped him. "Holy shit," Rourke breathed. "She's directing us." The storm thickened, turning the world into a shaken snow globe, as visibility collapsed to 10 feet, radios dissolving into a steady wall of static. But Lyra's bullets remained visible. Hot metal, cutting through frozen air, brief streaks of light like fireflies in the whiteout, and everyone carried meaning. She hit a boulder. "Cover here." She struck an overhang. Enemy, 17 meters up. She fired a zigzag across the canyon floor. "Don't advance straight. Ambush waiting." The SEALs stopped questioning and simply moved, following the script she wrote in real time, trusting the woman they'd dismissed 72 hours earlier. Because in this frozen nightmare, she was the only one who could see, the only one who could communicate, the only one capable of leading them out alive. Donovan reached Creed and cinched a tourniquet while Lyra's shots kept heads down. Barrett and Rourke hauled Brooks toward the slot canyon as 2 others laid down suppressive fire, finally understanding the system. Lyra would mark the safe path, and they would move in the breathing space between her shots. "She's running low," Rourke shouted, hearing the growing delay between rounds. But he was wrong. Lyra wasn't empty. She was rationing, calculating. Every remaining cartridge had a job, and she couldn't afford waste. 20 rounds left, 18 fighters she'd counted. Simple math, brutal execution. A silhouette suddenly appeared on the ridgeline, an RPG hoisted onto his shoulder. Lyra saw him a heartbeat before he fired, her shot striking the rocket tube itself. A 1,000,000-to-1 impact that triggered the launcher to erupt in his hands, the backblast tearing apart 3 more fighters, while Barrett stared at the blast in disbelief, whispering, "That's not possible." But it was, because Lyra Vance didn't miss anymore. Not since Naren taught her that when you lose your voice, you survive by being flawless. Because perfection becomes the only language that doesn't need sound. The enemy sniper revealed himself with a round slicing past her head by half an inch, cracking against the stone behind her, in a calm, practiced shot from a hunter who understood his prey. And Lyra didn't even twitch because she'd been expecting him. Good ambushes always had overwatch, and this one was too coordinated to be run by anyone but a trained killer. Another predator moving through the white chaos as she rolled left, and another round struck where her shoulder had been 2 seconds earlier, showing he was fast, reading her movements, anticipating her shifts. Not some local with a battered rifle, but someone refined, lethal. The sniper the SEALs called the Falcon of Kunar, the ghost who had dropped 17 coalition troops in 6 months, rumored to have trained with Chechen mercenaries and capable of hitting at 1,000 meters in weather that grounded aircraft, a 6-figure bounty on his head with every hunter who'd chased him failing. Lyra went perfectly still, because in a sniper duel, the one who moves first loses. The one who fires first dies. The game demanding patience. And patience had become her second skin, as snow layered her ghillie suit, until she vanished into the terrain, while her slowed breathing blurred her vision, and her scope swept the opposite ridge, millimeter by millimeter. Knowing the Falcon was doing the same. 2 apex predators, locked in a duel, older than war itself, until she spotted him, or rather the absence of him. A small disruption in the snow's pattern, 45 degrees left, 580 meters out. His body hidden in a hollow, with only his barrel visible. Something anyone else would have missed, but Lyra had spent 2 years learning to see what shouldn't be seen. The wind gusted 40 knots from the northwest, temperature shifts bending heat signatures, and she calculated automatically. Bullet drop 38 inches, Snowspin adding drift, needing a 6-inch lead to counter his inevitable dodge. But he was calculating too, and both knew whoever fired first exposed themselves, while whoever fired second survived, stretching the standoff into long, grinding minutes, as her legs cramped and her fingers numbed while neither sniper moved, and below them the SEALs dragged casualties out of the kill zone. But up on the ridge, the world had narrowed to 2 scopes, 2 mines, 2 triggers, until Barrett made a fatal mistake by standing too high while signaling Cole, the Falcon pivoting toward the easier target. And Lyra fired first, the bullet smashing through the side of his scope. Should have killed him instantly, but he shifted at the microsecond mark, the round ripping through his optic and grazing his cheek instead of drilling through his eye. And he rolled with practiced reflex, bringing up his iron sights as his return shot punched into Lyra's shoulder, tearing muscle and fragmenting against bone. Pain exploding bright and sharp, but she was already crawling to a new position, her left arm limp as she cycled the bolt one-handed, blood running hot down her ribs and melting the snow beneath her, while the Falcon rose to take the final shot, forgetting the one rule of a sniper duel: never stand. Just before her second round, punched through his collarbone and drove down into his heart, dropping him instantly, his body crumpling and tumbling down the slope like a lifeless puppet, while Lyra sagged into the snow, vision tunneling as victory soaked her uniform in freezing blood. "Vance is hit!" Rourke shouted, seeing her collapse and the spray across the white, starting toward her, before enemy fire pinned him down again. "We can't reach her!" Barrett shouted, his voice breaking. "We need to move now or we're all dead." And Creed, barely conscious, locked eyes with Cole, the unspoken question hanging between them like a weight. Do we leave her? But Lyra wasn't finished. Through the fog of blood loss and burning pain, she still saw the battlefield clearly enough to understand the one thing that could save them: the enemy ammunition depot, a hidden supply stash 50 meters behind the primary firing point. Something she'd caught earlier through her scope. Metal crates half-buried, poorly camouflaged, fragile if hit with heat. One incendiary round would do it. Her rifle spoke again. Once, twice, 3 times. Each round placed with mechanical precision despite her trembling hands, despite shock biting into her veins, despite her vision sliding sideways. And a heartbeat later, the cache erupted into a chain of explosions that tore through the enemy line, sending fighters scrambling as fire rolled across the hillside and the entire ambush dissolved into burning chaos. The inferno gave Bravo exactly what they needed: a wall of smoke, a distraction, and a clear exit path. "Move!" Cole roared. "Get to the canyon! Vance just bought us the out!" The SEALs sprinted, Barrett and Rourke dragging Brooks, 2 others lifting Creed, all of them following the bullet-marked corridor Lyra had carved for them, even as she bled into the snow. Cole reached her last. She was trying to stand and failing, her left arm hanging limp, her legs unsteady, and he seized her webbing, hauling her upright. "I've got you, ma'am. Don't you dare die on me." She looked at him with unfocused, burning eyes, and raised her right hand, signing, "Tell them, follow the canyon left, cave at 200 meters. "Save your strength," Cole muttered, but he was memorizing every sign because now he understood. Her silence wasn't a flaw. It was a blade, and she wielded it sharper than any of them had realized. She thought in ways they couldn't, saw paths they missed, communicated in purity of intent instead of noise. They moved together through knee-deep snow, while explosions thundered behind them, enemy fire snapping at their heels. But the smoke and confusion bought them seconds, and seconds were enough. The slot canyon was exactly where she'd indicated, tight enough for single file, high-walled enough that snow hadn't completely swallowed it, and they pushed deeper until the gunfire faded into distant rumble. At 200 meters, the cave yawned open in the mountainside, natural shelter, defensible and hidden, and they collapsed inside, bleeding, freezing, breathing. They had 1 hour before the enemy regrouped, 1 hour to stabilize the wounded and ration ammunition. But no extraction would be coming in this storm. The blizzard had matured into a full whiteout, grounding even medevac birds. Creed drifted in and out. Brooks looked ghost-pale from blood loss, and Lyra sat against the rock as Cole worked on her shoulder, packing the wound while she refused morphine with a slow, deliberate shake of her head. She needed to stay sharp because something was coming. She felt it in her bones. And Barrett counted their remaining ammo with a grim face, saying they had barely 30 rounds total, no grenades, 1 smoke, and that if the enemy pushed hard, they were finished. Fletcher muttered that they would push, because Bravo had killed too many of them and wounded their pride. And through the cave mouth, the storm still screamed. But beneath the wind, another sound rose. Engines, many of them. Technicals, Cole whispered. They're bringing vehicles. Lyra dragged herself to the entrance, every movement a shard of agony, sweeping her scope across the blizzard, just long enough to glimpse shapes between breaks. 5 trucks, mounted machine guns, 40 to 50 fighters. And the numbers were impossible. 8 wounded SEALs with almost no ammunition against a reinforced assault. Barrett looked at her desperately. Can you do something like before? But she had no miracles left. 4 rounds in her mag, her left arm dead weight, her vision swimming from blood loss. Her bullet language required ammo she didn't have, clarity she couldn't muster, and strength draining with each heartbeat. Still, she scanned the terrain for an edge, and found it. A massive cornice above the incoming convoy, a wind-packed overhang hanging like a guillotine over their trail, unstable and deadly if triggered. But the angle from the cave was wrong. To hit the weak point, she'd need to climb higher, exposed in the open, where the enemy could cut her down instantly. Lyra pushed herself upright, swaying, pointing from the cornice to herself, and making the sign for "I'm going out there." "Negative," Cole said. "You can't even stand." But she met his eyes with the cold truth. "We're all dead anyway, so let me make it mean something." Before Fletcher could stop her, she was already in motion, stumbling into the storm with her rifle and those 4 rounds, while Donovan cursed and Barrett shouted that she was insane. She didn't look back, the wind slamming into her like a wall, as snow stabbed at the exposed skin around her wound, her shoulder screaming with each step while she climbed toward a boulder cluster that offered the angle she needed. She slipped twice, fell once, kept crawling upward as machine gun fire ripped into the hillside, rounds kicking up fountains of snow around her because she was too weak to dodge and too slow to run. 50 meters, 40, 30. A round tore into her thigh and sent her tumbling, but she clawed forward, leaving a red trail behind her, vision tunneling until she reached the boulder and collapsed, lifting her rifle with trembling hands. The cornice hung there 600 meters out, the stress line visible in her scope like a fracture in glass. 3 perfect shots could bring 10,000 tons of snow down on the convoy, and she had 4 rounds, 1 spare, no room for error. First shot, left anchor, fracture widened. Second shot, right anchor, spider cracks split downward. Enemy fire hammered her cover, shredding rock, closing in from multiple angles as return fire from the cave failed to hold them back. Third shot, center. The mountain groaned under the hit, the cornice shifting but still holding. 1 round left, 1 chance. Miss and everyone died. Hit and maybe the storm bought them life. Lyra's world collapsed to the last stress point, the trigger under her finger, and the stillness between heartbeats as she fired. The cornice shattered with a sound like creation tearing. 10,000 tons of snow plunging downward in a white cataclysm that swallowed the convoy whole, burying trucks and fighters under 30 feet of compacted ice. When the roar finally faded, the trail, the vehicles, the enemy, everything was gone. Lyra lowered her rifle and let the darkness take her. Barrett saw her slump behind the distant boulder and ran before thinking, before Cole could stop him, before logic returned because he, the one who doubted her most, mocked her silence, questioned her ability, was now sprinting into a blizzard for the woman who'd saved him 5 times in 3 hours. He reached her, skidding beside her limp form, checked for vitals, weak pulse, shallow breaths, hypothermia already setting in, too much blood lost. "Stay with me, ma'am. Don't quit," he begged, as her eyes fluttered open, unfocused, her hands trying to sign but failing. "Don't talk," Barrett said, then caught himself. "I mean, don't try to. You know what I mean." Her lips shaped words she could never voice. "Get them out." "Not without you." He lifted her, shocked by how light she felt, hollowed out by blood loss. "You don't get to play hero alone. That's not how SEALs work." Fletcher and Cole appeared through the drifts, forming a human chain to pass her down the slope as the storm erased their tracks, erased the battlefield, erased everything except the will to survive. Inside the cave, they laid her beside Creed, 2 officers bleeding out while the men around them refused to let them die. Fletcher tore open the last medkit. Cole worked to stop the bleeding, and Barrett held her hand, shame burning through him as he remembered every doubt he'd ever thrown her way. "You know what's crazy?" Fletcher muttered, while packing gauze into her thigh wound. "She never needed to talk. We were just too damn stupid to listen." Outside, the storm finally cracked open, a few slivers of blue appearing through torn clouds. Barrett grabbed the emergency beacon and activated it with shaking fingers, the signal blasting into the sky for any coalition aircraft within range. "Extraction inbound," he called, voice trembling. "ETA 45 minutes. But Lyra's pulse was fading, her skin ice cold. 45 minutes might be 44 minutes too late. Creed clung to life, Brooks needed surgery, and the others sat bruised, freezing, exhausted. "Stay awake," Barrett whispered, squeezing her hand like it could tether her to the world. He ordered her to stay awake, voice tight with fear, telling her that was a direct command, and her eyes locked onto his, even through the haze of blood loss, still carrying that sharp, unbreakable focus she'd shown with every shot and gesture. She squeezed his hand once, clear, deliberate, letting him know she was still fighting. Time crawled as Rourke rambled about his hometown and his daughter's upcoming birthday. Anything to keep her conscious. While Cole recounted the impossible shots she'd made, the angles no manual covered, the bullet trails that had rewritten their tactics in real time, saying command would lose their minds trying to understand how she'd led without a voice. Lyra's lips shaped a faint reply. "I didn't lead. You followed." Barrett understood instantly. She hadn't been issuing orders. She'd been offering paths, possibilities, marking choices they finally trusted enough to take, and the leadership had been in that trust, not the bullets themselves. 38 minutes after activating the beacon, the thump of rotor blades cut through the storm. A Black Hawk pushing through broken clouds, its pilots gambling everything on a dying signal. It slammed into the snow, rotors screaming, and they loaded Creed first, Brooks next, then lifted Lyra despite her attempts to stay alert and watch her team board. And Barrett climbed in, only after everyone else was accounted for. As they lifted off, Lyra stared down at the battlefield, watching the storm erase the tracks, the duel, the avalanche. Soon no sign would remain, but she and her men would remember. At Bram Airfield around 0300, the helo dropped them at the emergency unit, where medics surged forward, taking Creed straight to surgery, Brooks next, and Lyra fought the sedation until the morphine finally dragged her under as the doors closed. 19 hours later, she woke in recovery, left arm immobilized, thigh wrapped in fresh bandages, IV humming beside her. The sterile white room felt violently bright after the mountain's muted gray. Cole sat nearby with his arm in a sling, nodding as she woke and telling her Creed had survived surgery. Brooks was stable, and everyone else was bandaged but griping, meaning alive. Her hand lifted to her throat, out of old habit before Cole handed her a tablet with a message app. She typed slowly, asking about the mission, and he explained the CIA advisor had been dead before they even set out. Intel failure, meaning they'd walked straight into a trap meant for him. But command, he said, wasn't talking about that. They were fixated on her tactical communication method. She typed that it hadn't been a method, just desperation. But Cole dismissed that as nonsense, saying he'd served 12 years and never seen anything like what she'd done, that she'd spoken to them louder than anyone with a voice, because they'd been forced to actually listen. A doctor entered, checked her wounds, told her the shoulder would heal and her thigh had missed the femoral artery by millimeters, that she'd recover with therapy, and reminded her the psych eval was standard for anyone who survived what she had. She nodded, already knowing the empty questions they'd ask, and knowing none would capture what it meant to command through silence, or nearly die because the people who once doubted her finally realized she was worth trusting. That evening Creed visited, moving carefully, and after a long moment he raised his hands and signed, "Thank you." Her eyes widened as she realized he'd learned enough sign language in the 19 hours she'd been unconscious to say it. She signed back, "You trusted me," and he corrected her with slow, steady hands. "You earned it." Bravo platoon drifted in throughout the night, Barrett bringing coffee and guilt until she silenced him with a raised hand, and the typed message "We're good." Rourke showing her a video of his daughter singing off-key, telling her he'd have missed the moment if not for her. They left before long. Rules were rules. But Barrett paused in the doorway to tell her command was putting her up for a medal, maybe more than one, and wanted to debrief her about the tactical implications of what she'd done before shaking his head and saying none of that mattered because they had already decided on a new call sign for her if she approved. She lifted a brow, and he said, "Commander without voice, because you led better than anyone we've served under, and the voice never mattered." Later, alone in the dim ward, she listened to machines hum and aircraft rumble outside while thinking of Nareen Province, the voice she'd lost, and the person she'd been forced to become. She'd mourned that loss for 2 years. Maybe now she could accept what she'd gained. 3 weeks later, Bravo held a small ceremony at a quiet edge of Bram, a patch of ground near the mountains where snow still clung despite warming air. They had built a cairn 6 feet tall, and into the largest stone someone had carved the words. She spoke not with words, but with bullets. Lieutenant Lyra Vance, Kunar Mountains, 2023. The entire platoon stood present, along with their CO, a handful of intel officers, and a 2-star general who had flown in just to attend. The general delivered a speech about adaptation under fire, about communication rising beyond spoken language, about courage taking forms no doctrine ever anticipates. Though Lyra barely absorbed his words as she stood before the cairn, with her left arm still bound in a sling, her uniform sharply pressed despite the biting wind, the mountains looming behind her, the same mountains that had tried to end her, and had instead forced her into someone she never expected to become. When the general finished, Creed stepped forward, holding a black case, opening it to reveal a bronze star with a Valor device, reading aloud. For Lieutenant Lyra Vance, whose actions under heavy fire in the Kunar region saved 11 service members and resulted in the elimination of 47 hostile combatants. Her innovative nonverbal coordination and exceptional precision under extreme conditions reflect immense credit upon herself and the United States Naval Special Warfare Command. He pinned it onto her uniform personally, then stepped back and saluted, the entire platoon following. 11 men in the cold, honoring the woman they had nearly underestimated to death. After the ceremony, after the general departed and the CO dismissed everyone, Lyra walked to the cairn alone, placing her hand on the carved stone, feeling the rough surface beneath her fingertips as she traced the inscription. Barrett approached quietly, stopping a few feet behind her and saying they'd be receiving new tasking soon, likely another winter deployment. But that command was offering her a stateside training billet if she wanted it, And after everything she'd survived, no one would fault her. Lyra lifted her tablet and typed a single question. "Where is Bravo going?" Barrett exhaled. "Pakistan border. High-altitude reconnaissance and direct action. Cold, isolated, brutal terrain." And before he could finish, she showed him her response. "I'm in." He grinned, saying he figured she'd say, or type, that, then hesitated before explaining that the entire platoon had started learning sign language, with Fletcher's girlfriend helping teach them over video calls, because they thought it might make coordination easier. Lyra stared at him, something warm blooming deep inside, because they weren't just tolerating her silence anymore. They were choosing to share her language, building a bridge she never demanded, but suddenly realized she'd needed. She signed Y, and Barrett replied, signing clumsily, but sincerely. "Because you shouldn't have to do all the translation. We're a team. We learn each other's languages." He finished with a shaky thank you for saving us, and the wind carried snow across the ridge as Lyra turned toward the peaks, the cairn, and the man who had gone from skeptic to believer, thinking of Nareen, of the voice she lost, and of the new language she found. Maybe some losses were just transformations. 6 months later, Bram's training facility hosted a class unlike any before it. 30 snipers and spotters from various special operations units gathered in a lecture hall, watching a woman who never spoke teach them ways to communicate they'd never imagined. Lyra stood before a tactical map, placing colored pins, each pin a shot, each shot a word, as the students watched her hands sign explanations while an interpreter voiced them, though increasingly the interpreter wasn't needed because they were learning to read trajectory the way others read text. "The key," the interpreter translated, "is understanding that every shot changes the battlefield. It isn't just hitting a target, it's creating information. A bullet line in snow is a drawn stroke. A ricochet off rock is a directional cue. You're not simply shooting, you're writing." Petty Officer Sarah Chen raised her hand to ask what to do when visibility is low and impacts can't be seen. Lyra smiled, pointed to her ears, then her rifle, and fired a blank into a metal barrel, its echo sharp, distinct. Then another into sand, a softer signature, demonstrating how sound could replace sight, how shooters could learn to hear information instead of seeing it. From the back of the room, Barrett watched his former lieutenant transform from survivor to instructor, realizing the teams had never known they needed someone like her, a specialist in silent coordination. Because while other teachers explained marksmanship, Lyra taught something deeper, a battlefield language. After class, a young SEAL approached her. The young SEAL approached and said, "Ma'am, I went through the Kunar report, the 18 rounds you used to guide your team out. I've been trying to figure out the pattern, but..." Lyra raised a finger to pause him, pulled out a large photo of the battlefield, layered with her shot placements, handed him a marker, and motioned for him to show her what he saw. He studied the image, tracing the arcs of the bullets with his finger, brow furrowing. "You weren't just mapping a safe path. You were telling a story," he hesitated. "No, wait. You were teaching them to think the way you do. Each round showed not only where to move, but how to read terrain, how to sense threats, how to anticipate the flow of the fight." His voice trailed off as the realization hit him. "You were turning them into better operators as it was happening." Lyra nodded and signed a simple message. "Every round is a lesson. Make them matter." The young operator walked away with a completely new sense of what precision could mean. Lyra gathered her materials for the next session, glancing out the window at the mountains. Always there, quiet and ancient. The same kind of peaks that had stolen her voice years earlier, and different ones that had returned it in another form months ago. Now she was teaching others that communication had never depended on sound. It depended on being understood, on conveying meaning when words failed. And in special operations, where silence often kept you alive and noise could get you killed, The way she communicated was exactly what the community needed. Lieutenant Lyra Vance, the commander without a voice, had finally found her place. Not in spite of her silence, but because of it. Because some truths aren't spoken at all. They're demonstrated, carved into snowbanks, etched into rock, written in arcs of gunfire that speak louder than breath ever could. The cairn at Bram still stood, weathering storm after storm, its inscription untouched. She spoke not with words, but with bullets. And throughout the special operations world, a new language was taking shape, built one shot at a time.